Sorry, but I'm going shopping with mom now, so can you head to the hospital alone? You can make a phone call, so there shouldn't be a problem, right? When labor pains started, and I tried to call my husband for help, I received a cold reply and the call was disconnected. After the birth was over and I felt relieved, I received a call from my husband. Please, I need your help. I responded coldly in return. My name is Judy. I am a 30-year-old office worker, currently on maternity leave and soon to give birth. My husband, Peter, and I live together, and his parents' house is near ours. Whenever he has time, he often returns to his parents' home. At my in-laws, my mother-in-law and unmarried brother-in-law live together. My father-in-law passed away just before we got married. My husband is concerned about his mother and rushes to his parents' home. If there's anything slightly worrying, it's been hot recently. I'm worried if mom is not feeling well due to the heat, so I'm going to check on her. He often returns home for such reasons. But I think there is no need to worry so much since his brother is also there. It seemed like my mother-in-law was getting fed up with my husband visiting their home daily. Don't worry about me. Take care of Judy, who is pregnant. Even though his mother said this, my husband continued to care deeply for her. I was wondering why he was so attached to his mother. But then I learned the reason from his brother. Actually, Peter was often sick as a child. So our parents gave him special treatment. Especially mom, she doted on Peter a lot, so he's always been a mommy's boy. After hearing this, I understood why my husband was so caring towards his mother, and felt that being filial was wonderful. I decided not to worry about it. My mother-in-law is not the type who can't let go of her son. On the contrary, she tries to keep a good distance from him. So I took advice from my brother-in-law to let my husband be free. Although my mother-in-law is a bit cold towards my husband, she is kind to me, not treating me badly just because I am her son's wife and keeping a good distance. When visiting my in-laws with my husband, they treat me not as a daughter-in-law but as a mere visitor. So honestly, I wish we could be closer. When I talk about my mother-in-law to my friends, some say, "It's nice you don't have mother-in-law problems." But sometimes I feel lonely being treated so formally. Listening to friends who have experienced mistreatment by their mother-in-law, I feel lucky to have a mother-in-law who doesn't complain or harass me. I have talked to my parents about my mother-in-law, and my mother seems relieved about her attitude. When we went to greet her, Peter's mother seemed a bit cold, so I was worried. But since you don't live together, I guess there's no need to think too deeply about it. My mother's opinion makes sense, and I might be lucky. I haven't been troubled by mother-in-law problems. But there have been minor concerns in my relationship with my husband. We entered our second year of marriage, and just before I found out I was pregnant, I began to have doubts about my husband's suspicious behavior. At the beginning of our marriage, he always came home early to help me prepare dinner or cook together. But after more than a year of marriage, he started coming home late. At first, I thought maybe it was a busy period at his company and didn't pay much attention. But when my husband came home late, I noticed a different scent at the entrance. My husband doesn't use perfume, and he usually only smells of hair products. I felt that the scent was different from the perfume I use. At that time, I thought about asking him, but I didn't say anything, thinking maybe he had picked up someone else's scent accidentally. However, the same perfume scent kept coming from him, and I started to suspect that my husband might be having a secret affair with another woman. He seemed completely unaware that he was carrying the scent of perfume, and always came home with an innocent face. "You've been coming home late recently. Is it because of work?" Since he was returning home with the scent of perfume every day, I became concerned and asked him. "Yes, that's right. Recently, the transition to a new system has been challenging, and it's taking a lot of time." He answered without any sign of disturbance. But I wondered if his workplace was filled with the scent of perfume, if it could transfer to him so strongly despite being at work. As I was considering hiring a private investigator for infidelity, I found out I was pregnant, which left me with no room to think about such things. The joy of the first grandchild was immense for my parents and my mother-in-law. Therefore, I decided to put off investigating my husband's possible infidelity. Ideally, I should have investigated before the baby was born. However, the fear of possibly confirming his infidelity kept me from having the courage to proceed with the investigation. Even if my husband was indeed cheating, I hoped that knowing about the baby would make him stop and prioritize our family. When my parents learned about the baby, they immediately went to buy baby items and started thinking of names even without knowing the gender, which made them very happy. My husband was also delighted about the baby and rushed to his parents' house to share the good news with my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. While my brother-in-law was very happy, his mother seemed to react calmly as usual. Even after learning about the baby, my husband continued to come home late. Worried, I tried my best not to think about it, prioritizing the baby inside me. In reality, there was no other evidence or definitive proof of infidelity besides the scent of perfume. With mixed feelings of wanting to trust my husband, my belly grew larger, and my kind mother-in-law began visiting our house to help. Peter seems to be busy with work and can't come home immediately. And you must be feeling lonely alone, Judy? She said this and came to our house just before I returned home, preparing dinner. I was deeply touched by the kind actions of my mother-in-law, whom I had initially perceived as cold. It seemed that she was also concerned about my husband coming home late every day. She asked if there were any changes in his behavior, but I refrained from bringing up the perfume topic. It was difficult to tell my mother-in-law, Peter's mother, about my suspicions of his infidelity, especially without any concrete evidence. However, when my mother-in-law started helping with dinner preparations, my husband's behavior changed. Neither I nor my mother-in-law had mentioned his late returns, but suddenly, he started coming home earlier. At first, I thought he was coming home early to see his mother, but it seemed he didn't want to be questioned about his late returns by her. It seems you are busy with work, but you should support Judy more. My husband was visibly disturbed by this and behaved unusually. I'll start coming home on time from now on, so Mom, you don't have to worry anymore. After saying this, he forcefully sent his mother out of our house. And from the next day, he truly started coming home early. Yet, my mother-in-law continued to visit in the evening to help. And my husband looked annoyed, glancing sideways at her. I felt anxious as his behavior had changed from enjoying time with his mother to being uneasy. Since my husband suddenly started coming home early after my mother-in-law began helping out, I began to suspect that his late returns were not due to work. Feeling unsettled as I started my maternity leave, my husband expressed his dissatisfaction. Isn't it normal to go back to your parents' house to prepare for childbirth when you start maternity leave? I'm fine alone, so feel free to go back home. I had told my husband that I planned to return to my parents' house for the baby's birth preparations once I started maternity leave. But I had been planning to relax at my parents' house after the baby was born because of the help from my mother-in-law. I thought I had mentioned this to my husband a little while ago, but for some reason, he was insisting that I should go back to my parents' house. It must be hard for Mom to come here every day to help, so she doesn't need to come anymore. Just as I was considering agreeing to my husband's request to return to my parents' house, my mother-in-law approached Peter and spoke. It seems like you want to drive everyone away and be alone. My husband quickly denied her words and then told me, you don't have to go back if you don't want to. Listening to my mother-in-law's remarks, it seemed like she, too, had doubts about my husband, and I wanted to ask if she knew something. Still, I couldn't directly ask my mother-in-law. Is my husband seeing another woman? So I could only silently listen to their conversation. Soon after, as I was ready for the baby's arrival at any moment, I had something I wanted to confirm with my husband. If I start having contractions and it seems like the baby is coming, you'll come to the hospital with me if you're off from work, right? I was planning to ask my father to take me if my husband was at work. But I was hoping my husband would come with me if he was off. My husband recently started coming home from work earlier. But on his days off, he often leaves in the morning.
Yeah.
I'll try to arrange something if it's my day off. Feeling uneasy at his hesitant response, I hoped that at least he would come to the hospital with me for the birth of our child. On his next day off, my husband said he had errands to run in the morning. Being a worrier, especially with the birth approaching, I reminded him multiple times. If something happens, I'll call you, so come back right away. My husband confidently replied, "Don't worry, leave it to me," but I felt uneasy inside. As I feared, labor started in the afternoon, and I quickly called Peter. "Sorry, but I'm going shopping with Mom now. So can you head to the hospital alone? You can make a phone call, so there shouldn't be a problem, right?" My husband replied coldly and hung up abruptly. Despite my recent suspicions about his behavior, I hadn't expected him to refuse to accompany me to the hospital. I hesitated whether to keep calling him until he returned. But as the labor pains worsened, I decided to ask my father to take me to the hospital instead. My father, thrilled about the grandchild, didn't ask why my husband wasn't there. My mother also accompanied me, providing a great sense of comfort. I felt it turned out better that my husband refused to come. However, by the time I arrived at the hospital, the labor pains were so intense that I had no room to think about my husband, and I was immediately taken to the delivery room. It felt like a long time until the baby was safely born. But it was actually about 5 hours, and I was relieved. It was quick for a first birth, I heard. My mother had contacted my in-laws. So my brother-in-law and mother-in-law came to the hospital, exhausted from the birth. I had completely forgotten about my husband's refusal to accompany me. But I was puzzled to see my mother-in-law, who was supposed to be shopping with my husband. By the time I noticed, it was already dark outside, and a significant amount of time had passed since I called my husband. Then, my smartphone rang, and it was a call from my husband. Thinking he was worried about me and had called, I answered the phone. My husband started talking in a panicked tone. "Please, help me. I got injured, can you come help me?" Instead of a call expressing concern for me just after giving birth, it was a request for help because he was injured. As I pondered how to respond, I replied with a bit of sarcasm. "Who are you?" My husband said he was going shopping with his mother. "But she is right here beside me." "So, you can't be my husband, can you?" My husband, sounding very flustered, ignored my sarcasm and kept repeating, "Please help me." My father, who was beside me, also noticed something was amiss and took my smartphone. Listening to my husband's words, "I'm injured and can't walk a single step. That's why I need you to come help. I'm currently in front of the station, you can come quickly, right?" As my father was the one listening, my husband, unaware that it wasn't me, concluded the conversation believing I would come to his aid. My husband spoke so loudly that my mother-in-law and brother-in-law also heard the conversation and expressed their anger before apologizing to me. "Judy, I am so sorry. I never thought my son would be such a failure." As my mother-in-law kept apologizing, I asked her to please stop bowing her head and apologizing. While my brother-in-law also continued to apologize, my father, holding back laughter, suggested going to pick up my husband. Everyone was surprised by my father's sudden proposal. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law tried to dissuade him, saying there was no need to go. But my father insisted on not leaving my husband injured and left the hospital room. I harbored a faint hope, wondering what would happen next. About an hour later, my father returned to the hospital room. Peter did indeed injure his leg. It was convenient, so I had him treated at this hospital. It seems like a serious injury, he might need to be admitted. While my father mentioned my husband's injury, he never lost his smile, leading me to quickly sense some trouble had occurred. According to my father, my husband was found squatting in a residential area, wearing trousers but only a t-shirt on his upper body, despite the cold, trembling. He had been waiting for my arrival, but as soon as he saw my father, he shouted in surprise, "Why is father here?" To my husband's astonishment, my father said, "Do you think Judy can come to pick you up? She has just given birth and is in the hospital." My husband seemed very confused and had no recollection that the baby was about to be born or that I had called him. While my husband was being examined, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law went to check on him, and after a while, my mother-in-law returned with a flushed face and suddenly bowed her head, apologizing again. "Judy, you should divorce my son. It's truly shameful as a parent that things have turned out this way." Filled with anger, my mother-in-law was replaced by my brother-in-law, who explained the situation in detail. That day, my husband had gone to his mistress's house, and while they were getting cozy in a second-floor room, suddenly the mistress's husband returned home. Thinking he would cause a scene if found, my husband, with only his trousers and t-shirt and smartphone, jumped out of the second-floor window and fled. He managed to avoid a confrontation with the husband, but injured his leg in the jump and became unable to walk, leading him to call me for help. It appeared my husband had sprained his ankle and was in such severe pain he couldn't make it home. Additionally, he left his ID and wallet at the mistress's house, which led to the discovery of his affair. When my mother-in-law and brother-in-law went to check on my husband, a call from the mistress came to his smartphone, and my brother-in-law, answering on his behalf, confessed everything. The mistress's husband was furiously threatening to sue my husband for damages. And hearing this from my brother-in-law, my husband seemed more shocked about this than his sprained ankle. "Judy, I am truly sorry. I will make sure Peter takes full responsibility, so don't worry." My mother-in-law apologized to me with a face that seemed on the verge of tears. Having gone beyond anger, my parents were also very angry that my husband had refused to take me to the hospital. Learning about his affair, they said that divorce was inevitable. Having just given birth, I too realized that it would be difficult to continue living with my husband. His lying and visiting his mistress just before the birth were unforgivable, and I found it hard to trust him anymore. Additionally, his selfish attitude of asking for my help when he got injured further disgusted me. The next day, when I went to visit my husband, who was still unable to move due to the pain from his sprain, he asked me with a wry smile, "Did the baby arrive safely? Is it a boy or a girl?" As I handed him the divorce papers in silence, my husband looked sulky. I spoke up clearly. "It's unthinkable that you went to see your mistress while I was in pain. I'll make sure you pay compensation and child support." Realizing that I knew everything, my husband sighed heavily and then signed the divorce papers. Afterward, I quickly filed the divorce papers and sought compensation from my ex-husband's mistress, starting a new life at my parents' house with my newborn baby. My ex-husband, unable to pay the damages demanded by the mistress's husband, was in a situation where he couldn't pay immediately. Thankfully, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law paid the compensation, and child support in advance on his behalf. It was their way of promising to fully support me and the baby's future. Of course, they told my ex-husband that he would have to repay the full amount of the advance they had covered during his hospital stay and after discharge. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law declared they would not take care of my ex-husband. The mistress didn't show up either, leaving my ex-husband isolated. Apparently, the mistress was furious that my ex-husband had left his wallet and fled, leading to the discovery of their affair and her own impending divorce. Not to mention the compensation she now owed. Therefore, she resented this clumsy ex-husband. The whole incident spread at my ex-husband's workplace, and he ended up resigning due to the judgmental eyes around him. My ex-husband was now being demanded by my mother-in-law and brother-in-law to pay back the compensation and child support they had advanced. And unable to continue convalescing, he was looking for a new job. After re-employment, my ex-husband, held by the nose by my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, couldn't say anything and diligently worked on paying off his debts. Meanwhile, I was busy raising my baby at my parents' house, managing the role of a mother with their support. My mother-in-law occasionally visited, and after the divorce, our relationship became genuinely cordial, no longer just in-laws. Though we were no longer related by marriage, it seemed we could build a good relationship through the baby. Is it okay if I visit sometimes until Judy finds a new partner? She said with a smile, and her visits were very welcome to me. Busy with childcare and not yet ready to think about remarriage. I believe that a child grows happier when loved by many people. So I hope for a healthy upbringing surrounded by caring people. Someday, when my child grows up, I hope to look back on the birth as a funny story and build happy days ahead.